So WDM, as most people in the room probably know, we launched our carbon capital campaign in March, which is a follow-on from various different phases of our climate campaign since 2007. The reason that we've focused on the UK finance sector is because when you look at projects around the world, kind of extraction projects, fossil fuel extraction projects, oil mining, a lot of the funds that fuel these projects come via the UK Finance Centre, and in particular the City of London. And it's one of the largest finance sectors in the world. And in order to tackle climate change, we really believe that we need to kind of unpick where the funding that enables all of these projects comes from. So just to give you a flavour of how bad the problem is, if you look at the London Stock Exchange, a quarter of shares on the London Stock Exchange are in fossil fuels. That's worth a staggering £9 billion. £900 billion, thank you. And a lot of this money goes through high street banks, so those common high street banks that you'll all know and maybe some of you bank with. These banks have underwritten £170 billion worth of bonds and shares in fossil fuels between 2010 and 2012. So this is actually the funds that come through the City of London. A lot of those funds actually come from ordinary people's money. It comes through our savings, it comes through our pensions, it comes through insurance that we pay. But we have very little say in how that money is used. And that's really what our campaign is looking at unpicking, is kind of saying, okay, let's expose where is this money going. This is our money, but we have very little say in how that money is used. So I'm just going to introduce you to the concept of the carbon bubble. Some of you may have heard there was a report that was supported by Nick Stern, who we don't always see eye to eye with in terms of his solutions. But the idea of the carbon bubble is it's the amount of CO2 that would be released into the atmosphere if all proven reserves of fossil fuels in our economy were burnt. So to give you a sense of the scale of how much this is, the top 30 companies on the London Stock Exchange hold more unburned carbon than the CO2 emissions of the whole world in the past 6 years. That's 470 times the UK's annual emissions that is currently the unburnt carbon on the London Stock Exchange. It's a huge amount. And so clearly, if we burnt all of those fossil fuel reserves, there are two things that, well, that would lead the planet into a complete climate meltdown. If we don't challenge this and say, well, we really can't keep believing that we're going to be able to burn those reserves without causing climate meltdown, we need to start thinking about the way that we're valuing the current unburnt carbon in our financial system. And if we don't do that, we're going to fall headfirst into a climate-related financial crisis, which is why it's being called the carbon bubble, in the same way as we've had kind of various financial bubbles that have caused problems in the past. So this is kind of it's a real issue. Either we kind of lead the world into a kind of a meltdown because of climate change, or we have another financial crisis, and we need to start unpicking this and being realistic about what we're able to do. So I'm just going to run through a few examples before we kind of unpick why all of that is happening. Firstly, the Sericon coal mine. These are all projects around the world that are financed via the UK Finance Centre. So the Sericon coal mine in Colombia is one of the largest coal mines in the world. It exports coal all around, mainly to Europe and the US, including to the UK. And it's destroyed countless communities. They actually haven't been able to keep track of the number of communities that have been displaced. It's caused huge health problems for the local population. It's caused a lot of water, pollution of the water supplies as well. this is something that is one of the things that's particularly kind of upsetting about this is that the local people don't benefit from the coal. A lot of them live in energy poverty and they don't have access to that coal, so they're not benefiting from it. It's all the benefits are going back to people in the north. Similarly, the Niger Delta region in Nigeria is where Shell operates. There's been countless oil spills there, human rights abuses. Shell has funded paramilitaries, and there's gas flaring, which is so hot that you could cook your dinner off them. That's also financed by the City of London. And also the tar sands. I'm sure people are familiar with the tar sands in Canada, but there are also new tar sands that are being explored in Madagascar. The tar sands in Canada are about the size of Wales, and there's been really strong campaigning across this, across the world, but particularly in North America, because of the kind of impacts that would have in terms of climate change. But it's also displaced a lot of indigenous communities from their lands. So why is it that that the UK finance sector are still able to pour so much money without any kind of constraints? If you look at this graph, it shows you, this is something that when we launched the campaign, we launched a report that I've got some copies of here, called The Web of Power, that looks at the links between the UK government, the current government, and the fossil fuel and finance sectors. So if you look at this, all these lines here, you might not be able to read around the edge. There are names of the different ministers, and it shows the links between the fossil fuel industry, the government, and the finance sector. We found that a third of the current government is linked to the fossil fuel and finance sector. So it's hardly surprising that this web, that we're caught in a high carbon model of a high carbon economy, and it's really hard to move away from that, because all of the politicians who are making the rules are also benefiting from the fact that that is the way that it works. So I'm just going to give you a few quick examples of that. Here we've got Vince Cable. Vince Cable worked at Shell for 7 years. He ended up being the chief economist there. The CEO actually recently called him the contact minister for Shell, and there was talks of setting up a hotline directly to Vince Cable for anyone from Shell. Next, we've got William Hague, who has personally called up the Ugandan government to try and get Tullow Oil, which is another London Stock Exchange listed oil company that explores oil, to try and get them out of paying £175 million worth of tax that would have otherwise gone to the Ugandan government and could have been used to fund social projects. Instead, William Hague is trying to get them out of paying it. And even David Cameron himself is connected to this web of power. He's accepted a lot of money from hedge funds that also finance fossil fuels. So WDM is, through our campaign, we're planning on working in solidarity with activists around the South and communities who are resisting these kind of projects. This is Tatiana, who came over from Colombia during the launch of our campaign. She's working to resist the Sericon coal mine along with a lot of other communities in the area. So we did some talks with her and tried to get her story and the story of other community activists. You can hear more about that in a session that Richard is organising this afternoon about mining. We're also doing what we can to expose the problem. So this is a picture from a carbon bubbles stall that we did in the City of London outside Black Rock, which is one of the main financers of the Sericon coal mine. And we gave out champagne, which actually was an oil-like substance, to bankers to see their reaction and kind of communicate the problem of what they're funding and bring the reality of what they're doing back home to the bankers. In terms of the solution, so we're initially asking for transparency. And this is really a bit of a litmus test to get a sense of how far we're able to get the current government to act on climate change. So in Rio Plus 20, the UK government announced that companies were going to have to report on their carbon emissions. However, they've excluded the finance industry from having to report on what they're financing. So we're saying that as a first step, we need to see how bad the problem is. And so there needs to be legislation to be transparent about that. But obviously, that's only going to make it clear what the problem is, and we need to go further than that. We need to actually push for reform to the system, for some kind of transformative solution. We're kind of in the process of working out the best way forward for that, and that's going to be a discussion that we engage supporters in, those who want to be engaged in it, and we're continuing to discuss it with other experts. So we've got various ideas about what we might call for. And in the meantime, we're going to be, like I said, exposing the problem, helping people to understand and to kind of toxify what the connections between the city, between government, the fossil fuel industry and the finance industry. So in terms of what people can do, demand transparency, as I've just said, we've got a lot of action cards, we've got a petition, we've got an action on our website. Move Your Money, you've possibly all heard of the Move Your Money campaign. It's something that, you know, on one hand it's an individual action, but if enough people move their money away and make it clear that they're moving their money away from these banks because of fossil fuels, then that's going to force change in itself. Can show solidarity with activists who are resisting these projects that are financed by the City of London. It's really important to kind of tackle the source of the funding. You could run a carbon bubble stall. We, WDM, have got kits. I know a lot of groups have already done it, and it would be interesting to hear any feedback from anyone in the room. Hold talks, events, and in mid-October to mid-November, we've got a Dirty Energy Month coming up that's part of the global campaign to demand climate justice. So there'll be people taking actions around dirty energy all around the world for a whole month, which spans from the IMF and World Bank meetings right through to a number of different dates on fracking and oil. And so we'll be creating some actions around that. So, okay. So I'm going to open up to questions now. We've got about 20 minutes left.